PHI 209. You're welcome to study section 6. Fallacy. In this study session, we will discuss the concept of fallacy. We will also examine informal fallacy. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Define and use correctly the term fallacy. 2. Discuss fallacy involving ambiguity and unwarranted assumption. 3. Explain fallacies without ambiguity. 4. Describe fallacies involving ambiguity. Premises of fallacy. Fallacy, simply put, is error in reasoning. Fallacy can either be formal or informal in nature. Formal fallacy has to do with errors, with types of deductive arguments. The informal fallacy, on the other hand, pertains to mistakes and common flaws in our everyday language. The latter is our concern here. Fallacious argument is one which violates the logical criterion for a valid argument. Thus, in arguments that are fallacious, the truth of its conclusion is not guaranteed by that of the premise. Informal fallacies include those involving irrelevant premises, ambiguity, and unwarranted assumptions. Fallacies with irrelevant premises. This category of fallacy, just as the name suggests, involve the use of premises that are logically irrelevant to their conclusion, but for some reason, the premises appear relevant. The most common of them are argumentum ad hominem, that is, attacking the person. This fallacy is so called because it usually leaves the subject of discussion uncritiqued, but goes ahead to attack the person or a group of persons proposing an opposing argument. The attacker's main objective is to make our assertion acceptable. Look at this, for instance. National conference, bullshit. The people who are calling for national conference are persons many of when history long ago left behind. Causes that will not be heard with respect anywhere. Individuals who will never ever claim 1 minute attention from serious people wanting a platform to come and exhibit and stamp our nation with the hallmark of neurosis. Can you notice how this argument attacked the person of the proponent? The argument does not give reason why national conference should not take place. It rather aimed its critique on those opposing a national conference. See another example. Abortion should be prohibited in the society because it is killing of fetuses, and fetuses are humans. I do not agree, says Smith. This is because those discouraging abortions are Roman Catholics, because their doctrines and values do not support abortion. Therefore, we should not take their views seriously. Straw man. This fallacy happens when you critique or attack a caricature of the original argument. It is usually attacking a misinterpretation of the opponent's view or the act of selecting for reputation a weak version of a position rather than a strong one. Example: I am opposed to consumer rights groups. I don't care how many airbags and seat belts you install in a car. If you drive at a brick wall at 150 mph, it isn't going to be a pleasant experience for the passengers. Hugo and Miriam are arguing about cleaning out their wardrobes. Miriam: we should clean the wardrobe. They are getting really messy. Hugo: why? We just went through those wardrobes last year. Do we have to clean them out every day? Miriam: I never said anything about cleaning them out every day. You just want to keep all your junk forever, which is just ridiculous. Argumentum ad ignorantium. This type of fallacy becomes evident when someone says that because a claim has not been shown to be false, then it is true, or that since a claim has not been proven to be true, therefore it is false. For example, the activities of the Islamic sect Boko Haram in northern Nigeria since it started years back has been restricted to the north. We can therefore say that it can never extend to the west. For centuries now, no one has been able to show that a man can give birth. Therefore, I think we can safely conclude that men can never give birth to a child. The alarmists have not succeeded in proving that the toxic and radioactive materials dumped in cocoa are dangerously harmful to human life. The materials are therefore perfectly safe. Argumentum ad misericordiam, that is, appeal to pity or emotion. Misericordiam is a Latin word that stands for pity or mercy. Thus, this fallacy is appeal to considerations of pity, mercy, or emotion, which is usually irrelevant to the claim or conclusion, but is intended to evoke the sympathy of someone or people in favor of the claim. This fallacy is commonly found in use in the court of law. For example, the case of a young man pleading for leniency on the ground of being an orphan. Meanwhile, he is being tried for the murder of his parents. In addition, a lawyer seeking for a waiver of death sentence passed on his client based on the fact that his client has a family, an aged mother, and a lot of dependents to cater for. The plea is irrelevant to the criminal offense committed and the judgment that the murderer has to die. Appeal to pity is what the students in Ronald Monson's The Way of Words tries to do. If I don't pass this course, I won't be able to graduate this spring. And I don't have enough money to go to summer school. Really, Professor Roston, you just have to give me a chance. Argumentum ad baculum, that is, appeal to force. Staff is the English equivalent of the Latin word baculum. Staff symbolizes power. This fallacy is usually employed in a situation where the conclusion is accompanied or strengthened by a threat to the well-being of those who do not accept it. This threat can either be physical, moral, or psychological in nature. Sometimes it can be explicitly expressed or subtle in nature. The case of a physical force goes thus: Mr. Jones, you helped us import the drugs. For this, the boss is grateful, but now you are entitled to 50% of the profits. The boss says you are entitled to 10% unless you see things the boss way. You are going to have a very nasty accident. So, you are entitled to 10%. Got it? Psychological threat. Listen, Valerie, I know you disagree with my view about the building project. You made your disagreement clear to everyone. Well, it is time for you to see that you are mistaken. Let me get right to the point. I knew you have been lying to your husband about where you go on Wednesday afternoon, unless you want him to know where you really go. It's time for you to realize that I have been right about the building project all along. You follow me? Tu quoque. That is, you also. This fallacy is mostly committed when we are trying to get ourselves off the moral hook. It takes the form, you do it too, so it's okay for me to do it. It also has to do with implying that since a person's conduct has been inconsistent with what he says or with an earlier position, then a position or view should not be accepted. In some way, tu quoque resembles argumentum ad hominem. Pray, I really think you were a little rude to Madame Caro Onyeka. Why are you criticizing me? She was rude to me first. Senator Dawson has accused me of misappropriating campaign funds, of turning them to my private use. The charge is a grievous one, and to answer it, I need only to say to you that a careful look at Dawson's own practice, which will make it clear why he makes such an accusation. His own financial dealings are not beyond reproach, and like the cornered snake, he strikes at me. Fallacies involving unwarranted assumption. Unwarranted assumption is so called because of some errors in reasoning, which need support, but most of the time, the support is not always provided, thus making the assumption illegitimate or unjustified, thus undermining the force of the argument. Detecting fallacies that have to do with unwarranted assumption is usually tricky. Hence, our discussion in this session of such fallacies. Argumentum ad verecundiam, that is, appeal to authority. This fallacy consists in appealing to the wrong authorities or expert on a particular subject of discussion. For example, when the expertise of a professor of philosophy you invoke on an issue that borders on geophysics, the philosophy professor, even though knowledgeable in his field, will most certainly just be a layman when subjects of geophysics are involved. Ad verecundiam is committed when there is doubt as to whether an authority is reliable or not. This could either be the person too is not an authority or expert at all, or not one in the appropriate area. Petito principii, that is, begging the question. This fallacy happens when you argue in cycle, that is, when you have already assumed the premise of an argument, the conclusion which you intend to prove. By so doing, you would not be saying anything new on the whole. The conclusion of the argument is usually almost the rephrased version of the premise. If you smoke, you are likely to get cancer. Therefore, you are likely to get lung cancer if you smoke. Or, the defendant is not guilty of the crime. This is because she is innocent of having committed it. Or, if men are to survive, they must be fit. Indeed, only the fit survive. And we can verify this by simply looking around and seeing who have survived. Obviously, they have survived because they are fit. Complex question. In this type of fallacy, two or more questions are asked as if they were a single question, and the answer to one of the questions presupposes the other or others. For example, 1. Have you stopped drinking to stupor now? 2. Why is gym so boring? Hey, Professor, have you stopped plagiarizing papers? George, yes. Professor, that means you were plagiarizing papers and that you have stopped now. George, what? Professor, well, you said you had stopped. That requires that you had been plagiarizing before. You could not very well stop if you had not started, right? George, I mean that no, I haven't stopped. Professor, so you are still plagiarizing papers. If you have not stopped, that means you have been and still are plagiarizing away. George, no, I mean, I don't know what I mean. Sally, George, You got suckered into that. The right answer to say, no, I didn't stop because I never started. Fallacy of complex question is committed in the first example because it is already presupposed by the questioner that you used to drink to stupor. The same assumption abounds in the last two questions, where it is assumed that the gym is boring and that the student plagiarizes. False cause fallacy. The most common of the different varieties of false cause fallacy is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore, because of this. This fallacy occurs when an individual takes an event as the only cause of other phenomenon without providing reasons for the exclusion of other possible causes. Here is an example. Her boss, how are you feeling today? SST. Every time you come by to see me, I feel worse. I might start feeling better if you stay away for a few weeks. The witch bird chirped last night and the child dies this morning. Who does not know that the witch caused the death of the child? These examples are false cause because the visit of a Bose could not in any way have aggravated the ill health of Osose. Also, the cry of the witch may not be responsible for the death of the child. Slippery slope. This is a form of false cause fallacy. It occurs when an individual makes an unsubstantiated claim that one event will cause some chains of events or reactions, usually a negative reaction. This fallacy usually plays on our deepest fears. For example, if we let the communists take over El Salvador, the next thing you know, they'll be in Mexico. Once they take over Mexico, however, they'll head for Texas, and it is just a matter of time before we are all communists. Boko Haram, the terrible Islamic sect, has been terrorizing northern Nigeria for some time now. As soon as they are able to penetrate Lagos, the commercial center of the country, the whole of the south, will be affected, and then there will be another civil war. False dilemma. The fallacy of false dilemma is simple. Take two. The fallacy of false dilemma in simple terms means that you employed a premise that unjustifiably reduced the number of alternatives to be considered when there is actually more than that. I am tired of all these young people criticizing our own dear country. What I suggest is this. Nigeria, love it or leave it. And since these people obviously do not want to leave the country, they should love it instead of criticizing it. The false dilemma in this instance is suggesting that there are just two options, either to love Nigeria or to leave the country, which is apparently not the case. Other alternatives are, you can stay and be the change that you desire in the country. You can also pray for her, among others. Fallacies involving ambiguity. The confusion that happens in this step of fallacy is usually a subtle one. It occurs between two closely related concepts, hence the term ambiguity. Some of them are fallacy of equivocation. This fallacy is committed when words that have more than one meaning is used in a manner that implies different meanings or senses of the word within the same context. Only man is rational, but no woman is a man. Therefore, no woman is rational. This argument commits fallacy of equivocation because it made use of the word man in two different senses within the same context. In the first premise, the word man means humans. In the second premise, however, the word means male humans. Fallacy of amphiboly. This fallacy entails some ambiguity. Ambiguity is lack of clarity in language, which might be intentional or accidental. The double meaning of amphiboly is as a result of syntactic or sentence structure, such as grammatical errors or mistake in punctuation. This fallacy is more subtle and harder to detect than that of equivocation. It occurs mostly when there is misinterpretation in someone's original statement or intention. Dr. Moshalachi delivered a lecture on homicide in the University of Kingston Large Lecture Theatre. I gather that a lot of people have been murdered in that hall. Temi, Erika told Suliat that she had made an error. Mascot: wow, I'm impressed that Erika was willing to admit the error she made. Fallacy of composition. The fallacy of composition is committed when we mistakenly reason that what is true of the parts must therefore be true of the whole. This no doubt can be true in some instances. For example, if we safely conclude that since the dog's head is brown and his back and legs are brown, the dog is brown. This is not a fallacy. It is, however, a presumption to think that this kind of reasoning is always correct. The examples below are, however, that of fallacy of composition. Each of the parts of this car engine is light. Therefore, the car engine is very light. Each player on the football team is outstanding. Hence, the team is outstanding. Even though the car engine may be made up of very light parts, this does not mean that the engine is light, because when these parts are put together, the car engine itself becomes very heavy. Same goes for the football team. If there is no teamwork or adequate time to practice together as a team, take two, as a team, the team as a whole may not be outstanding. Fallacy of composition can also be committed when there is confusion between the distributive and collective use of general terms. Elephants eat more than humans. So, elephants taken as a group eat more than humans taken as a group. The fallacy here is that the phrase eat more than in the premise is predicated distributively, meaning that each individual elephant is said to eat more than any individual human eats. The conclusion, however, uses the phrase eat more than in a collective manner to mean that elephants taken as a group are said to eat more than humans taken as a group. This is not true because there are many more humans than elephants. Care should be taken in trying to identify fallacy of composition so as not to confuse it with fallacy of division or hasty generalization. The similarity between fallacy of composition and division is that both have to do with reasoning about parts and whole, while composition reasons from a thing's part to its whole. Division goes from whole to part. Composition and hasty generalization both reason from something specific to something general. Hasty generalization also is not about parts and wholes, but about faulty generalizations based on specific and uncharacteristic situation. Fallacy of division. This is just the opposite of fallacy of composition. The fallacy of division is committed when we mistakenly reason that what is true of the whole must therefore be true of the parts. We sometimes innocently reason in this way. The building contains nothing but bricks. Since the whole building is red, the bricks must also be red. Often, however, this type of reasoning is fallacious. Example: Tessie, Why do you go to that club instead of the one that is close? John Bull: It has been around since the turn of the century. Tessie: Really? John Bull: You should spend more time with people who are your own age. The presumption here is thinking that since the club has been around since the turn of the century, that the people that go to the club too will be old people. Study session summary. In this study session, we examine some of the informal kinds of fallacies like argumentum ad hominem, ad baculum, ignorantium, misericordiam, straw man, tu quoque, among others. We also discussed the last two divisions of fallacy, that is, those of ambiguity and those involving unnecessary assumptions. We have come to the end of study session 6. Thanks for listening.